Welcome to the Will to Power podcast. I'm your host, Nick Fatal. Before I begin, do me a favor, hit the like and subscribe button. It lets me know you like these sorts of podcasts. Lets me know the like button is obviously helps me in the algorithm. Leave a comment to let me know what you like about this podcast, or if you disagree with me in anything. I want to know your thoughts as well. So let's begin. Today we're talking about key terms. Now, I have a very unique set of politics, and I think it's helpful if I clarify what I mean. And this also will serve as, a key point of reference if I want to point anybody to, what I believe. Now, the first term is adaptive virtue. I often talk about virtue. What do I mean whenever I say this? Well, I mean characteristics. A virtue is a characteristic, and it is a virtue and not a vice, because it is generally useful for both individuals and groups to succeed in competitive environments. They're characteristics that have generally helped people. So this might be things like intelligence, right? A group or a person that is more intelligent will generally fare better against other groups which aren't as intelligent. Same thing with strength and courage, creativity, honor. Having a society where you can kind of trust people is generally more adaptive, right? These are all things that are adaptive and that help groups and people. Now, it's not necessarily a thing where everybody has to have all of the same virtues at the same levels. There are definitely things like masculine virtues and feminine virtues. It's good for some people to be more inquisitive, while others are a little bit more obedient. It's good for some people to be more empathetic, while others are more, let's say, brutal and aggressive. Now, generally, like I said, these are good because they help people succeed in competitive environments. Now, what does this mean itself? Well, the world itself is a competitive place, right? We're stacked against nature. We're kind of thrown into this world, this cold, cold world. There's all sorts of forces of nature. There's resource limitations. So how do we fare in this? And how do we cope? And how do we deal? Well, the more sorts of virtues we have, like creativity, strength, health, vitality, creativity, then the better we can do. The same thing, there are other groups out there, right? And it's kind of like the drive of everything to compete. And that's a good thing. It enables the development of higher forms, forms of things with more capabilities. So that is sort of adaptive virtue in a nutshell. It's those things that will both help you and your tribe succeed. And I encourage people to spend time, instead of making a to-do list, make a to-be list, right? Make a list of characteristics that you would like to be. And I've listed a few basic things, but it might be much more detailed. It might be 40 or 50 things. It might be things like conscientious, clean, decisive, persistent or patient, charismatic, well-spoken, strong, athletic, adventurous, risk-taking, leading. These sorts of very important traits for, if you're a guy, for men. The ability to manage others, the ability to be persuasive, the ability to do any number of things, the ability to tie a fucking knot. I guess that's, I'm not a fucking Boy Scout. I don't know how to tie tons of fucking knots. well, I do know how to tie some knots, but, not the Boy Scout kinds. The next key term is neo-tributary. Now, I actually wrote a book, and I wrote this under a different name, my old pen name. And part of the focus was on economic theory. And the part of the thesis was that we're kind of inevitably entering a stage of political economy where we're not... Capitalism doesn't really describe the economic system. It's not merely the private ownership of the means of production, but rather is these huge conglomerates that are often tied to finance, media, technology, sometimes biomedical, and they're able to extract large rents because of their enormous power and influence. And not only that, but they're often directly connected in with kind of state intelligence. And not only that, but the infrastructure that they set up necessarily consolidates and expands and kind of infiltrates everyday life with power and regulation. They're kind of centralizing power and regulation, where everything we do is increasingly regulated through an app like Uber. If it's capitalism at all, it could be called something like subscription capitalism. And, I think other people have talked about it as kind of like a managerial state. Or I think Keith Woods recently had a video on neo-feudalism, and it's this very similar sort of concept. And this is an inevitable sort of development in a way. We're at a period of human history where technology has reached such a level that it necessitates that those states that succeed and have power in the world will be those kind of large states that have devoted a great deal of resources towards technology, towards the ability to project control worldwide and even beyond the world, right? Even into space. So it's a very important feature of the modern world, this neo-tributary economics. Now, this is a broad term to describe a political economic system. This has many kind of cultural faces. I would argue that the Soviet Union was a neo-tributary system. Now, this was a very state-centric neo-tributary system. Modern China is also a neo-tributary system. I call it the Chyborg. It's a good description for it. In the West, there's Globo Homo. So we're kind of familiar with the different cultural manifestations of neo-tributarianism, but we don't really have a name for it. Neo-feudalism, neo-tributarianism, the managerial state, that sort of thing. That kind of takes me to my next terminology, and that is the Globo Homo. Now, the Globo Homo, this is not a homophobic term. This means globalized homogeneity, and it's the general tendency in the West to kind of boil everything down to the standardized, lame, gray, gay, sort of one-size-fits-all cultural template. And you've seen if you're young, you haven't seen this because your limited experience of the world gives you a small frame of reference. But, and even myself, right, I'm not that old, but, we've seen this in the modern world where everything has kind of been flattened, with these few brands dominating everything, and moreover, because it's more cost effective to make everything look the same, to produce it the same way by a few large firms, or a few large firms, then as a result, everything kind of looks the same, right? The buildings in Cincinnati look the same as the buildings in Phoenix to some extent, right? The architecture of the sky rises. It's all very tiresome, right? And even to some extent the fast food restaurants, right? It used to be kind of like Arby's looked pretty distinct from Subway, which looked distinct from McDonald's. Now they all look the same for the most part. They have different signs, but that's about it. But in any case, it's kind of ruined nations, ruined races, right? Everybody goes on about race realism, but the reality is races often let themselves go. This has happened, to different degrees in different places, but in the West it's happening in a very pronounced way. And you can, it's not just kind of, race mixing. No, it's a bunch of fat, degenerate, dysgenic white people who survive off fast food and live this very lame life. And if it's not the rednecks, then it's the lame NPCs on the coastal NPCs, the people who live in the pod homes and go off about, these little consumer fetishisms that they have. The next term is the Bugman. Now, the Bugman... Now, I actually have a debate going on with BAP. BAP says this goes to Dostoevsky. He's wrong. It goes to Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams has this excellent quote, it's actually the first paragraph, I want to say, of The Glass Menagerie, where he talks about the kind of features of modern life at that time on the East Coast in the United States, where people lived in these little pod homes arrangements where it was exclusively reserved for these powerless people in this kind of emergent system. These people who were just kind of getting along. They were merely living to reproduce the next generation. They were essentially bugs or cogs in this system. Now, the modern Bugman has very little aspirations, or they do have aspirations, but they're tiny, right? They have no aspirations or no meaning inside the world besides trying to live up to the moral code that they've been handed to them. We've all seen the Bugmen. They're everywhere, for the most part. They may be more or less dysgenic. Some Bugmen are very into fitness because they have nothing else going on in their lives. But in general, the Bugman is the sort of man who blindly obeys the system and sees virtue in doing so, right? We've seen the Bugman in kind of cultural manifestations as well. So if you've seen Fight Club, now the lead character, the unnamed narrator, he starts out as the archetypal Bugman, right? He defines his life by his possessions. He's going through the IKEA magazine. He has this very meaningless life, working in the cubicle, living in the pod. In this case, his whole life was dedicated to decorating his pod in the hive. And we see this in other movies as well. Office Space is another good example of the archetypal Bugman. I can't remember the main character's name right now, but similar sort of situation. This man who kind of goes to work every day has this very meaningless life, and in both cases in these movies, the whole arc of the story, right, is the man having the psychological break, not wanting to be the Bugman anymore. And interestingly enough, The Glass Menagerie is the same way. The young male character at the end of the play runs away. He goes to find adventure. Now, that was an earlier time, in this case, there's less adventure to be had in the modern world. Kind of globo homo has closed that off. There's less areas to explore. You can't be a pirate anymore. The next term is new right. So new right kind of encompasses a vaguely authoritarian right, not so much tradcon, but more futurist and based on creating a sort of new identity based around virtue of, I would say, eugenic virtue, adaptive virtue. So it's a eugenic sort of right, a positive eugenic right that wants to create better people. So there's this, and this is a kind of new movement, right? Because we're not simply based around, Christian identity or, white identity, but rather trying to create a new identity. So a new notion of what it is to be Western or American or even male. So it's kind of bound into virtue ethics. And that's going to just lead me into the last part, and that is virtue socialism. So virtue socialism is an interventionist state which aims to cultivate and promote a citizenry of virtue. Very simple. So rather than kind of leftist socialism, which tries to make everyone equal and thinks that will somehow create better people, or which tries to make people's lives more comfortable and that will somehow make better people, virtue socialism is simply concerned with making better people. It's kind of this notion of don't ask for an easy life, ask for the ability to overcome struggles. So virtue socialism would be the sort of system which creates challenges and creates struggles for people, creates hierarchies for people to rise throughout their life so that they can gain a sense of meaning, and so that they can become more virtuous and capable. Through doing this, it will create a better society, right? Again, it's not aimed at creating an equal society. It's aimed at creating greater people. And you can only create greater people if you have distinction between greatness and mediocrity. So that is virtue socialism. And I would say with virtue socialism, again, not trying to create an easy life for people, not trying to create a good life, no, trying to create better people. But I would say it distills the essence of different traditions without getting hung up on their forms, right? So we all know what virtue is. Why don't we promote virtue? Why do we have to promote the form of it? Why does that, there's different kind of virtues that are expressed through these traditions, right? Like whether it's Stoicism or Hinduism or Christianity, that are very useful and that kind of transcend, in a way, each of these traditions that can be applied today. And I would say with another point about tradition, right? We kind of look back at, say, the founding fathers and or ancient Rome, but their identity was much different than we kind of ascribed to them, and the way they viewed tradition and modernity was much different than ours. So I will just finally kind of cut it out with that. But these are sort of key terms for my thinking on political economy, political philosophy, those sorts of things. So if you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor. Make sure you hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and share this on social media, right? I know you're a part of a group chat, or I know you're a part of some sort of web forum. Share it with people, ask them what they think. It's a great way to spark a conversation, to spread ideas, and if you have any questions, if you have any comments, be sure to leave those below, and I will catch you next time.